There was an unsettling feeling in the air as we all gathered at Mom and Dad's place for our regular family dinner. The usual jovial atmosphere was clouded by an unspoken tension that I couldn't quite put my finger on. As I looked around the table, I noticed furtive glances and strained smiles, a stark contrast to the warm camaraderie we typically shared. It wasn't until after the meal, when we had all retreated to the living room, that the cause of the discomfort became glaringly apparent. My daughter-in-law Celia was conversing with my niece, her words dripping with disdain. "Can you believe Eliza still insists on cooking these archaic recipes?" Celia scoffed, rolling her eyes. "It's like she's a relic from a bygone era, a mere house ornament, clinging to outdated traditions." Her words felt like a slap across my face, and I could sense the collective intake of breath from the others present. For a moment I was paralyzed, unsure of how to respond to such blatant disrespect. Anger surged through me, but I quickly tempered it, recognizing that lashing out would only further escalate the situation. Instead, I took a deep breath and focused on maintaining my composure, choosing to address the issue at a more opportune time. As the evening drew to a close and our guests began to depart, I found myself lingering in the kitchen, helping my husband Tom with the cleanup. His gentle touch on my arm drew my attention, and I met his concerned gaze. "Are you all right, Eliza?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "I know Celia's words stung, but try not to let them get to you." I forced a smile, but my heart was heavy with a newfound realization. My daughter-in-law's disdain for my role as a homemaker had been simmering beneath the surface all along, and her callous remark had merely brought it to a boiling point. As I retired to bed that night, my mind whirled with a multitude of thoughts. Celia's dismissive attitude towards my lifestyle choices had become increasingly apparent, and I couldn't help but wonder if her disrespect extended beyond just words. It was in that moment that I vowed to confront this issue head-on, to stand up for myself and the values I held dear. No longer would I allow Celia's contemptuous behavior to go unchecked. It was time to reclaim my dignity and assert my worth, not just as a homemaker, but as a woman deserving of respect. In the weeks that followed, an uneasy calm settled over our household. Celia's disrespectful comment had left a sour taste, but I chose to temporarily swallow my pride in the hopes of preserving family harmony. That delicate peace, however, was shattered when Jake and Celia approached Tom and me with a proposal that would upend our lives. "Mom, Dad, we've been thinking," Jake began, his arm draped around Celia's shoulders. "With the cost of living these days, it's getting harder for us to save up for our dream of starting a business." Celia nodded eagerly, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "That's why we were wondering if we could move in with you for a while. Your place is so spacious, and it would really help us get our finances in order." My initial reaction was one of hesitation. Having Celia under the same roof, with her thinly veiled contempt for my way of life, felt like a recipe for disaster. But then I looked at Jake, my son, and saw the hopeful expression on his face. "We'd contribute to household expenses, of course," Celia chimed in, as if sensing my reluctance. "And I can help out around the house, too, take some of the burden off you." Her words rang hollow, but I couldn't bring myself to outright deny their request. This was an opportunity to build a stronger relationship with my daughter-in-law and support my son's ambitions. "Of course you're welcome to stay," I heard myself saying, despite the nagging voice in my head warning me of the potential consequences. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Jake and Celia settled into our home. At first, Celia seemed true to her word, pitching in with household chores and even offering to cook a few meals. But it didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. "Eliza, don't you think it's time to update these recipes?" Celia would comment, wrinkling her nose as I prepared a family favorite. "They're so outdated." Her criticisms extended beyond just my cooking, with frequent jabs at my cleaning methods and general homemaking abilities. "You really should consider hiring a professional cleaning service," she'd say, eyeing the spotless surfaces with disdain. "It's the modern way, you know." Her ingratitude and sense of entitlement only seemed to grow, casting a dark cloud over our once peaceful abode. "Don't let her get to you," Tom would murmur, his hand resting comfortingly on my shoulder as we lay in bed at night. "She's just young and doesn't understand." But his words did little to soothe the growing resentment I felt towards Celia. Her constant belittling of my way of life was grating on my nerves, and I found myself retreating into a shell of silence, biting my tongue to avoid unleashing the torrent of frustration bubbling beneath the surface. It was during one of these tense moments, as I was sorting through the household finances, that I made a startling discovery. Funds that should have been allocated for shared expenses were missing, and upon closer inspection, I realized the money had been diverted into Celia's personal account. Confronting her that evening, I was met with a dismissive wave of her hand and a scoff. "It's just a little something for myself," she sneered, her eyes narrowing. "You wouldn't understand being an obsolete relic and all." Her words stung like a slap across the face, but in that moment, something shifted within me. No longer would I tolerate her disrespect and blatant disregard for our generosity. As I retreated to the sanctuary of my bedroom, a steely resolve took root. It was time to take action, to protect not only my dignity but the very home that Celia seemed intent on undermining. Living under the same roof as Celia was like walking on eggshells. Her disrespect and entitlement seemed to know no bounds, creating a constant undercurrent of tension that permeated every aspect of our daily lives. It was the little things that gnawed at me the most. The way she would wrinkle her nose at the homemade meals I spent hours preparing, dismissing them as outdated. The disdainful glances she cast at the meticulously clean surfaces, suggesting we hire professional help. "Don't you think it's time to update your cleaning routine, Eliza?" she would say, her voice dripping with condescension. "These old-fashioned methods are so inefficient." It took every ounce of self-control to bite my tongue and not lash out in response. Tom, bless his heart, tried his best to diffuse the situations, reminding me that Celia was young and simply didn't understand the value of tradition. But her disrespect wasn't limited to my homemaking abilities. She seemed to take pleasure in undermining my authority in my own home, constantly challenging my decisions and belittling my contributions to the household. "Really, Eliza, do you truly believe you have the right to dictate how we spend our money?" she scoffed one evening, her eyes narrowing as I questioned her recent lavish purchases. "You're just a housewife with no real understanding of financial matters." Her words cut deep, and I could feel the anger bubbling within me like a volcano threatening to erupt, but I remained steadfast in my resolve, determined not to stoop to her level and engage in petty arguments. It was during one of these tense moments that the final straw came crashing down. As I was preparing dinner, Celia sauntered into the kitchen, her face twisted into a sneer. "Honestly, Eliza, when are you going to learn that your outdated cooking methods are holding us back?" she said, her voice laced with venom. "We're a modern family now, and it's time you embraced that fact." Something inside me snapped. I slammed the knife down on the cutting board, causing Celia to jump back in surprise. "Enough," I growled, my voice trembling with fury. "This is my home, and I will not stand for your constant disrespect any longer." Celia's eyes widened, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of fear cross her features. But it was quickly replaced by her trademark sneer. "Your home?" she spat back. "Don't delude yourself, Eliza. This is Jake's home, and by extension mine. You're just a relic clinging to a bygone era, desperately trying to retain some semblance of relevance." Her words felt like a physical blow, and I stumbled back, clutching the counter for support. In that moment, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, Celia would never respect me or the life I had built. As she turned on her heel and strutted out of the kitchen, a cold determination settled over me. If she wanted to play dirty, then so be it. I would no longer be the meek, submissive target of her scorn. From that moment on, I vowed to document every insult, every disrespectful comment, and every instance of financial mismanagement. Celia had declared war, and I intended to fight back with everything I had. Over the following weeks, I diligently documented every instance of Celia's disrespectful behavior and financial misdeeds. A thick folder slowly accumulated, filled with irrefutable evidence of her lies, insults, and blatant disregard for our generosity. One evening, as I was updating the records, Tom walked into the study, his brow furrowed with concern. "Eliza, what's going on?" he asked, gesturing to the pile of papers scattered across the desk. "You've been spending so much time in here lately, and I can't help but feel like you're keeping something from me." I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Tom had always been a pillar of support, but I feared involving him might only escalate the already volatile situation with Celia. "It's nothing to worry about," I said, forcing a reassuring smile. "I'm just keeping track of some things, that's all." Tom's gaze narrowed, and I could see the skepticism in his eyes. But before he could press further, the sound of raised voices drifted in from the living room, shattering the tense silence. "What do you mean you took money from the household account?" Jake's voice boomed, thick with anger. "That's not your money to spend, Celia." Celia's shrill response was almost indecipherable, but I caught the gist of her defense. "It's just a little something for myself, Jake. You know how expensive those new boots I wanted were." My heart sank as I realized she had been caught pilfering funds again, using the money meant for shared expenses to indulge her own selfish desires. Tom and I exchanged a knowing glance, and without a word, we made our way to the living room, where Jake and Celia were engaged in a heated argument. "You can't just take money whenever you feel like it, Celia," Jake shouted, his face flushed with anger. "That's not how it works." Celia's eyes narrowed as she caught sight of us, and a twisted smile crept across her lips. "Oh, look who decided to join us," she sneered, her gaze boring into me with undisguised contempt. "The obsolete relic herself, no doubt here to lecture me on the virtues of frugality and tradition." I felt my fists clench involuntarily, but I willed myself to remain calm. This was the perfect opportunity to confront her, to expose her selfish and manipulative behavior once and for all. "Jake," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within me. "This isn't the first time Celia has taken money without our knowledge. I've been documenting her actions, and I have proof of her repeated financial mismanagement and disrespect towards us." Celia's eyes widened in disbelief, and she opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand to silence her. "Don't bother denying it, Celia," I said, my tone firm. "I have everything documented right here." I retrieved the thick folder from the study and placed it on the coffee table, the weight of its contents a damning testament to Celia's deceit. Jake's gaze shifted between us, confusion and hurt etched into his features. "Is this true, Celia?" he asked, his voice trembling with barely contained emotion. For a moment I thought Celia might try to lie her way out of it, but as she met my unwavering stare, she seemed to deflate, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," she spat, her lips curled into a sneer. "I took the money. But can you blame me? Living with an obsolete relic like her is suffocating. I needed a little something to make this situation bearable." The venom in her words was palpable, and I felt a chill run down my spine. But beneath the hurt and anger, a newfound sense of determination took root. No longer would I allow Celia to treat me with such blatant disrespect. It was time to take a stand, not just for myself, but for the sanctity of our home and family. The aftermath of Celia's exposed deceit hung heavy in the air, casting a pall over our once peaceful home. Jake, devastated by his wife's betrayal, had retreated into a shell of stunned silence, barely uttering a word as he grappled with the harsh reality. As for Celia, she maintained an air of defiance, her chin tilted defiantly as she brushed past me in the hallways, her eyes burning with undisguised contempt. It was clear she had no intention of admitting wrongdoing or offering any semblance of remorse. In the midst of this turmoil, Tom and I tried our best to carry on with a sense of normalcy, determined not to let Celia's actions disrupt our lives any further. But the strain was palpable, like a taut wire threatening to snap at any moment. It was during one of our weekly family dinners, an event that had once been a cherished tradition, that the fragile truce finally shattered. Jake had invited a few potential investors to discuss his and Celia's business plans, and the mood was tense as we all gathered around the table. As the meal progressed, I couldn't help but overhear snippets of Celia's hushed conversation with one of the guests, her voice dripping with smug confidence. "Once we secure the funding, the first order of business will be to get this place in my name," she said, her eyes flicking dismissively in my direction. "Can't have the dead weight holding us back, if you know what I mean." My heart plummeted as the full weight of her words sank in. Not only had she shown a blatant disregard for our generosity, but she was actively plotting to strip me of the very home I had dedicated my life to building. In that moment, a cold fury coursed through my veins, banishing any lingering doubts I may have harbored. Celia's actions had crossed a line, and I knew I had to take decisive action to protect not only myself, but the sanctity of our family. As the dinner drew to a close and our guests began to filter out, I pulled Jake aside, my hand gripping his arm with a steel-like resolve. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. "In private." Jake's brow furrowed with concern, but he nodded wordlessly, following me into the study where I had amassed my damning dossier on Celia's transgressions. "I overheard Celia tonight," I began, my words measured and precise. "She's planning to try and put this house in her name once they secure funding for their business." Jake's eyes widened, and I could see the flicker of hurt and betrayal flashing across his features. "But why?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "This is our family home, our legacy." I let out a weary sigh, steeling myself for what was to come. "Jake, I'm afraid your wife has shown a complete lack of respect for us and the life we've built here," I said, gesturing to the thick folder on the desk. "I've documented everything, the insults, the lies, the financial misdeeds. It's all here, in black and white." As Jake leafed through the pages, his expression morphing from shock to anger, and finally resignation, I knew there was no turning back. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was prepared to fight with every fiber of my being. "I'm sorry, son," I said, my voice softening ever so slightly, "but I cannot stand by and let Celia tear this family apart. It's time we put a stop to her schemes, once and for all." Jake's gaze met mine, and in that moment I saw a glimmer of understanding, a shared resolve to protect what was ours, no matter the cost. With a wordless nod, we set to work, meticulously crafting our strategy. Celia may have thought she held all the cards, but she was sorely mistaken. I was done playing the meek, submissive victim. This was war, and I intended to emerge victorious, no matter what it took. With each passing day, the tension in our household grew thicker, like a suffocating fog that threatened to choke us all. Celia remained defiant, her smug smirks and dismissive glances a constant reminder of her utter lack of remorse. But beneath her arrogant exterior, I could sense a flicker of unease. She knew I had uncovered her web of deceit, and the walls were closing in around her. For my part, I maintained an aura of calm collectedness, going about my daily routines with the same diligence as always. But behind closed doors, a fierce determination burned within me. Night after night, I pored over the evidence I had meticulously gathered, cross-referencing dates, compiling financial records, and building an airtight case against Celia's misdeeds. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Tom found me, my eyes bleary from hours of scrutinizing bank statements. "Eliza, you need to rest," he said gently, his hand resting on my shoulder. "You're running yourself ragged." I shook my head, my gaze unwavering. "I can't stop now, Tom. Not until I've ensured that Celia can never hurt this family again." Tom's brow furrowed with concern, but he didn't press the issue. He knew better than anyone the depths of my resolve when it came to protecting those I loved. In the ensuing days, I took further steps to fortify my position. Consulting with a trusted lawyer, I laid out the evidence, ensuring that every detail was airtight and legally sound. "You have a strong case," the lawyer had said, her eyes scanning the documents with an air of grim satisfaction. "With proof of financial misconduct and verbal abuse, you could potentially pursue legal action against your daughter-in-law." The thought of dragging our family's dirty laundry through the courts was far from appealing, but I knew I had to keep all options open. Celia had proven herself to be a formidable adversary, and I couldn't afford to leave any stone unturned. Throughout it all, Jake remained a steadfast ally, his eyes growing harder with each new revelation of Celia's duplicity. It was as if the rose-tinted glasses had finally been shattered, revealing the ugly truth he had been blind to for far too long. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said one evening, his voice heavy with remorse. "I should have seen through her lies sooner." I reached out and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "None of this is your fault, Jake. Celia is a master manipulator, but we're going to stop her once and for all." As the weeks ticked by, I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down on me. Celia's schemes were unraveling, and it was only a matter of time before the final confrontation. and when that moment arrived, I would be ready. With a steely resolve, I continued to gather my ammunition, every insult, every financial discrepancy meticulously catalogued and laid bare. Celia may have thought she could steamroll her way through our lives, but she had underestimated the quiet strength that lay beneath my gentle exterior. I was a mother, a homemaker, and a protector of all that I held dear, and I would stop at nothing to defend my family, my home, and my honor. The battle lines had been drawn, and the stage was set for the ultimate showdown. Celia's reign of terror was coming to an end, and I would be the one to deliver the final blow. The tension in our household had reached a fever pitch, the air thick with unspoken accusations and barely contained animosity. Celia, for her part, maintained an air of defiance, her smug smirks and dismissive glances a constant reminder of her utter lack of remorse. But I knew her bravado was nothing more than a facade, a flimsy mask to conceal the cracks that were rapidly spreading beneath the surface. She could sense the walls closing in, and her desperation was palpable. It was during a large family gathering, one of those rare occasions where the entire clan had assembled, that the final confrontation unfolded. As guests mingled and laughter filled the air, I caught sight of Celia huddled in a corner, her expression one of barely concealed contempt as she surveyed the festivities. Taking a deep breath, I steeled my resolve and approached her, the weight of the evidence I had gathered feeling like a lead weight in my hands. "Celia," I said, my voice low but firm, "we need to talk." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she might refuse. But something in my unwavering gaze must have given her pause, because she nodded curtly and followed me into a nearby study, away from prying eyes and ears. Once the door was closed, I wasted no time in laying out the damning evidence before her. "Financial records, witness statements, recordings of your own words," I said, gesturing to the stack of documents. "It's all here, Celia. Irrefutable proof of your deceit, your disrespect, and your blatant disregard for our family." Celia's lips curled into a sneer, but I could see the flicker of fear in her eyes as she leafed through the pages, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "So what?" she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "You think a pile of papers is going to change anything?" I leveled my gaze at her, my resolve unwavering. "This isn't just about papers, Celia. This is about the damage you've inflicted on our family, the trust you've shattered, and the disrespect you've shown to our home and our way of life." Celia opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't bother denying it," I said, my voice hardening. "I have everything documented, every lie, every insult, every penny you've pilfered for your own selfish desires." Celia's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed at a loss for words. But her shock quickly gave way to anger, her face flushing a deep crimson. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You think you can just waltz in here and accuse me like some kind of sanctimonious matriarch?" I held my ground, unflinching in the face of her rage. "I'm not accusing you, Celia," I said, my tone firm but measured. "I'm simply presenting the facts, the undeniable truth that you've been so desperate to conceal." Celia's lips parted, no doubt to unleash another torrent of venom. But before she could speak, the study door swung open, and Jake stepped inside, his expression a mix of hurt and anger. "Is it true, Celia?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you really do all of these things?" Celia's gaze darted between us, her eyes wild and desperate. For a moment, I thought she might try to deny everything, to spin yet another web of lies. But then her shoulders slumped and the fight seemed to drain out of her. "Yes," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "It's all true." The silence that followed was deafening, a heavy pall settling over the room as the weight of her admission sank in. Jake's face crumpled, his features etched with a pain that cut me to the core. Without a word, he turned and left the room, the sound of his retreating footsteps echoing like a death knell. Celia and I were left alone, the air thick with tension and unspoken recriminations. "I hope you're happy now," she spat, her voice laced with venom. "You've destroyed everything." But as I looked at her, I felt no sense of triumph or satisfaction. Instead, a strange sense of pity washed over me, for this woman who had allowed her own greed and entitlement to blind her to the true meaning of family. "No, Celia," I said, my voice heavy with resignation. "You did this to yourself, and now you have to face the consequences." With those words, I turned and left the study, leaving Celia to grapple with the ruins of her own making. The battle had been won, but at what cost? As I rejoined the festivities, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hollowness, a realization that no amount of vindication could undo the damage that had been done. But as I caught sight of Jake, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted, I knew that this was just the beginning. The road to healing would be long and arduous, but we would walk it together, as a family. And this time, there would be no room for deceit or disrespect. This time, we would rebuild our home on a foundation of truth, love, and unwavering strength. In the aftermath of Celia's explosive exposure, our once peaceful home became a battleground of raw emotions. The air was thick with tension, each hushed conversation and furtive glance a painful reminder of the trust that had been shattered. Jake retreated into a shell of stunned silence, his eyes haunted by the weight of his wife's betrayal. He would spend hours locked away in his room, emerging only for brief, wordless encounters before retreating once more into his self-imposed exile. As for Celia, she maintained a defiant front, her chin tilted defiantly as she packed her belongings. But beneath her bravado, I could sense the flicker of shame and regret, a silent acknowledgement of the devastation she had wrought. "I hope you're happy now," she spat as she brushed past me in the hallway, her eyes burning with undisguised contempt. But the truth was, I felt no sense of satisfaction or triumph. Instead, a hollow ache settled in the pit of my stomach, a realization that no amount of vindication could undo the damage that had been done. In the days that followed, Celia's departure left a gaping void in our household. The weight of her absence hung heavy, a constant reminder of the fractured bonds that had once held us together. It was during one of these somber evenings, as Tom and I sat in the dimly lit living room, that the silence was finally broken. "I'm sorry, Mom," Jake's voice drifted in from the doorway, thick with emotion. "I should have seen through her lies sooner." My heart ached at the sight of my son, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his guilt and hurt. Without hesitation, I rose from my seat and enveloped him in a tight embrace, my fingers gently stroking his hair as he let out a shuddering breath. "None of this is your fault, Jake," I murmured, my voice steady despite the torrent of emotions swirling within me. "Celia was a master manipulator, and she preyed on your trust and love." Jake nodded wordlessly, his face buried in the crook of my neck. In that moment, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a steely determination to guide my son through this storm and help him rebuild the ruins of his shattered dreams. The days that followed were a constant exercise in patience and perseverance. Jake's wounds ran deep, and the road to healing was paved with setbacks and emotional outbursts. But through it all, Tom and I remained steadfast pillars of support, offering unwavering love and understanding. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shadows began to lift. Jake's smiles grew more frequent, his laughter echoing through the halls like a long-forgotten melody. He began to embrace his passions once more, pouring his energy into his work and rekindling the dreams that Celia had so callously trampled. As for me, a profound shift had taken place within. The battle with Celia had tested the depths of my strength and resilience, forcing me to confront the harsh realities of a world that often dismissed and devalued the role of a homemaker. But in the end, it was that very role that had proven to be my greatest asset, the bedrock upon which I had built a fortress of unwavering love and devotion to my family. As I watched Jake blossom once more, his confidence and zest for life reignited, I felt a sense of pride and validation that transcended any societal judgment or outdated notion of what it meant to be a woman. I was a mother, a protector, and a warrior in my own right. And through the fires of adversity, I had emerged stronger, more resolute in my conviction that the true measure of a person lay not in their career or societal status, but in the depth of their love and the strength of their character. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was abundantly clear. Our family had been forged anew, tempered by the flames of hardship and bound by an unbreakable bond of love, respect, and resilience. As I looked ahead to the future, I did so with a sense of hope and determination, secure in the knowledge that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together as a united front, forever strengthened by the ties that bind.